So let's get started here. So I'm going to start by telling you guys a story. And I'm going to tell you guys a lot of stories. And this one really sort of changed the way that I thought about the game. So this story is about YCS Atlanta 2010. And for this particular event, plants were like sort of the like up and coming like hype deck going into this event. That was what all the good players were like putting their time and effort into figuring out. So that's kind of what I did too. And I showed up with like a pretty all around like solid plant list. You know, most people agreed that it was good. I thought it was good. I, however, did not top. I went 7-2 on day one, and I went 1-1 on day two, you know, missing the top cut, which is pretty typical for me at the time. But the story isn't about plants. What it's about is gravekeepers. Now, a couple of weeks before this event, I was like hanging out at my locals, right? Because back then that was what I did. I went to locals every week, just like most players did. You know, hung out with the boys, that sort of thing. And I was watching someone play a match. And this person playing a match, he was like, you know, he was like a random, you know, not a good player, not someone who like ever topped locals or anything. But I noticed that he was playing gravekeepers. And I watched his match for maybe 5 minutes. And my thoughts at the time were sort of like, gravekeepers, that's interesting. You don't see people play that very much. And I just kind of like moved on with my day, right? Didn't really think twice about it. Now, anyone who remembers that particular event, YCS Atlanta 2010, will remember that gravekeepers took the event by storm. They absolutely dominated in a fashion that no one really expected. And this is very rare throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. This happens. Gravekeepers got first, second, and then also another spot in top 4. So they got 3 out of the top 4 spots. And I think a lot of players, you know, myself included, had wished, oh man, I wish I'd played Gravekeepers in this event. Why didn't I think of that? Hey guys. So, but my thought, and looking back on this in particular, my thoughts is like, I should have known, right? If I had just taken like slightly more than 5 minutes, right? If I had just, you know, instead of thinking, he's playing Gravekeepers, that's weird, and just, you know, continued on playing my plant deck, if I had said, Gravekeepers, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this guy's onto something. Maybe I should try it out. If I had just taken, you know, maybe a few hours and just put together a decent Gravekeeper deck and tested it, clearly I would have figured out, wow, this deck is an amazing meta call. I would have showed up to the event with Gravekeepers, and who knows, maybe I would have gotten first place instead of Fraser Smith. That was actually Fraser Smith's like breakout event before he sort of became like, you know, a more known player. He got first place with Gravekeepers. But obviously I didn't do that. And of course, like if I had picked up that guy's deck, you know, with consent, of course, if I had picked up his deck, copied his deck list, I'm sure like his build would have been extremely suboptimal, right? Because he wasn't a good player. But obviously the point of the story isn't that I shouldn't have played his exact list, but rather I should have taken that and, you know, just tried it out a little, and then I would have, you know, had the best deck for the event, which very, very few people did. And here's the thing, like, at that time, 2010, I knew a lot of good players, right? I certainly knew, like, all the best players in the area, and I also knew, like, a lot of the best, like, players who were active online. So it wasn't an issue of, like, oh, I didn't know the right people, right? Like, a lot of people think, like, oh, in order to get good ideas, you have to, like, you know, be in, like, the social group with, like, all the other good players. Like, not true at all. Like all these players who, you know, all 3 players who top for the event with the Gravekeepers, they were like all a bunch of randoms, right? Randoms at the time at least. Again, like Fraser Smith like went on to be an extremely accomplished player, but at the time, like he was a random. So, to sort of like take that going forward, how can we like expand this into a larger concept? What you have to realize is like, what is skill, right? What is the definition of skill in a strategy game? Skill is basically all it is just a difference of knowledge, right? You have two players, right? One person has this amount of knowledge, and the other player has this amount of knowledge. And if you subtract those two knowledge pools, the difference between those two knowledge pools is what we call skill, right? If you are saying that one player is more skilled than another, all you're saying is the amount of things that this player knows about the game is larger than what the other player knows about the game. That's all skill is. So then you have to think like, okay, if I'm this good and I want to get to be this good, right? Like, how do I do that? How do I like fill in the gap? And of course, the answer to that is, well, you have to learn more, right? That's just all you have to do. And how do you learn new things? Well, you have to try new things, right? And that's just really, all this is about. And in particular, Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, this exists in other card games too, but in Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular, people like actively resist this, which is very shocking. But the best players don't. I'll use a lot of examples from myself and my experiences, but I'll also talk about some examples of various other good players doing this. So, good example of this kind of concept that sort of demonstrates the bias that players have is last week when I was streaming, same day, same time last week, I was streaming myself playing Chaos Recruiters in GOAT format. And I was going over the deck, sort of explaining all the card choices, and I had 3 Dust Tornadoes in my deck. And like, there are multiple people in the chat, like, 3 Dust Tornado, like, why are you doing that? Like, what's, you can't play 3 Dust Tornado. It's, well, why not? Why not? Like, what specific reason is it that 3 Dust Tornadoes bothers you? And the reason why, like, it's sort of, this isn't like a thought process that is, something that you're actively doing. This is something like deep within your mind. This is like a bias. And as soon as people see anything that sort of challenges what it is that they're used to, they just immediately resist it. So in other words, if you look at GOAT format deck lists, you never see 3 Dust Tornadoes, right? For whatever reason. We can talk about, the various reasons why that is. The fact is that you don't see it. So when people look at a deck and see 3 Dust Tornadoes, they're just immediately like, that can't be right. And it's like, yeah, but what if it is? Maybe it's not right. I mean, in my case, I played the deck a few matches on stream, and, Dust Tornado, 3 Dust Tornadoes worked out good. I didn't lose any games because I was like, oh, darn, I drew too many Dust Tornadoes, right? But there were people, one guy in the chat was even like, oh, I would cut the 3rd Dust Tornado for an Upstart Goblin, which, like, I'm just thinking, like, geez, are you smoking crack or something? Like, you'd rather play Upstart Goblin in an aggro deck than another Dust Tornado. But again, it's not about Dust Tornado, right? It's not about Dust Tornado. It's not about Gravekeepers. It's about the larger concept of you have to try new things. And that's what I try to do, when I stream and, like, on my own. Because, hey, maybe 3 Dust Tornado would have sucked, but there's only one way to find out, right? And when I test that, I now know something that other people don't know, right? And I can apply that knowledge to other things, right? And if 3 Dust Tornado was bad, I would know why it's bad, and I, sort of acquired this deeper understanding of the game. So that's just kind of the idea. So, I'll give you guys, like, another classic example. I'll give you a Patrick Hobin example, actually. Patrick Hobin, in his book, Road to the King, he'd write about some of the, like, the theoretical stuff about, oh, yeah, you gotta play this many starter cards, this many extenders, whatever. But, like, in my mind, that stuff, like, isn't really like the root of his success. And I say this as someone who, like, I knew Patrick Hobin when he was kind of an up and coming player, and then I also knew him when he was like, pretty much like best in the world. So I can kind of like compare the before and after. Because like Hobin wasn't one of these people who like just started playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh and was just immediately crushing every event. Like rather the opposite. Like there were many, many years where he got underwhelming results. And same thing with me. And kind of the difference between like old Hobin and new Hobin was old Hobin was sort of much more on the mainstream side of things, right? Like, I think the first deck that he like topped a YCS with was like a pretty standard Lightsworn deck, right? Nothing like jumps out at you as unusual. Just standard deck. He had a good day. He topped. Whereas later, particularly in the Dragon Ruler era, he put a lot more deeper thought into the game, in the sense that, again, people who are familiar with that era, like 2013, what they probably remember is, oh yeah, Upstart Hobin, he was the Patrick Hobin, he was the guy who figured out that like Vanity's Emptiness and Upstart Goblin were like good in Dragon Rulers, right? That was like kind of like his sort of like major contribution to the deck. But like what people don't remember is the fact that for that WCQ, he tested Vanity's Emptiness and he was like, oh man, this is pretty good idea, right? And then he main 2 and the rest is history, right? But what he also did is he tested Super Rejuvenation. And Super Rejuvenation, this was like widely considered the best card in the deck. And it got banned after and so on and so forth. But he thought, well, maybe there's some chance it's not. There might be some chance that people are overrating this card, so I'm going to put some effort into figuring out whether or not this is the case. And, of course, he did realize, yeah, okay, everyone's right. Super Rejuvenation is a really good card. And, he mained 3 like everyone else in the world. But the fact that he took the time to question what everyone else was taking for granted is like what separated him and his thought process and how he prepared for the tournaments and how he gained knowledge. That's what separated him from everyone else. Everyone else was just like, oh yeah, Super Rejuvenation, it's the nuts, I'm maining 3. He said, yeah, maybe, but maybe not. And he realized that theoretically, right, hypothetically, if Super Rejuvenation was a bad card and he figured that out and no one else had figured that out, that would give him a huge advantage over everyone else. Just the same way that him knowing that Vanity's Emptiness was really good gave him a huge advantage everyone else. And when you look at like any of the top players over history, like whether you're talking about Billy Brake or Lazaro Bolito or Jeff Jones, like all of these greatest players, what you see is that they put a lot of their time into trying new ideas, right? They're doing what I call idea farming, which is they look for sources of new ideas. They go, hey, I think there's potential there. I'm going to test this. 90% of the time, it doesn't work out. But the 10% of the time that it does work out, they go and win an event, right? And, as I look over my career, many, many years ago, I realized that there are just so many missed opportunities where people were like trying to hand me the best deck on a silver platter. And I was like, no. Or it could be, some particular set of plays, right? This doesn't have to be like a whole deck necessarily, just some sort of new idea. I'd say, another good example of like what we can talk about is, say Aestheticism Samurai for YCS Orlando 2011. Actually, pretty shortly after that deck where I, kind of knew about Gravekeepers and chose not to play them, right? I didn't make the same mistake again. So the next YCS I went to, I played Aestheticism Samurai, and I didn't come up with that idea. right? And that's kind of man, chat distracted me. So so what I was gonna say is, oh right, I didn't come up with the idea for aestheticism samurai. Someone gave me the idea, and that is a common factor in like most of my successes and most people's successes in general. I think like a lot of times when you look at how Hollywood portrays invention, they often sort of like portray it as like, oh, the eureka moment, right? Where someone just wakes up one day and they have some brilliant idea. But that's just not how the real world works. Like, it's just not how it works at all. Realize that the human brain, or really the human body in general, the human body is just a giant chemistry set, right? It's just a series of triggered reactions. So everything that we do happens for a reason, right? There's something that triggers it. And it's the same thing with ideas. Like, ideas don't just like spontaneously appear out of thin air. Something triggers those ideas. And it was kind of like the same thing here. There was a guy that I talked with online. He was another Florida player. I forget his name. I should remember his name, but I don't. And he was like, good player. And he was like, yeah, I think this aestheticism samurai, I think there's something to this here. I think this is like a real deck. I think, it's faster, more consistent, so on and so forth. And I had gotten the sense that he had probably like given out this idea and his deck list to a lot of other people. And I say this because I wasn't like best friends with the guy. Clearly I wasn't. I can't even remember his name, right? So, this is a good player giving this idea out to probably, several other people. And I was like the only one who was like, hey, you know what? Maybe there's something to this here. I'm going to try this out. I tried a bunch of different builds. Unfortunately, I actually didn't get to like test it quite as much as I would have liked. So my build ended up being, I think, a little suboptimal. But, at that event, I went 9-2 in Swiss, barely missed out on top 32 cut. But again, the point of the story isn't what I played and the result I got. It's about process. So, I was testing this deck, figured out it was really good, posted it on Duelist Grounds, right? I'm like, hey, here's this deck, here's why it's, cutting edge and all that. And not only did, like, people think that the idea wasn't good, but they actually thought it was a troll post. They're like, oh, this deck is literally a joke. Like, ECP's posting this to troll us. So it's like, here I am, telling, like, hundreds of people, hey, this is, like, worth trying out. And again, they looked at the deck, saw, oh, this is so bad, and they weren't even willing to try it for one match, right? Kind of like Gravekeepers again, right? Weren't even willing to try it for one match. And, although I didn't top the event, a few other players playing Aestheticism in their Samurai decks did top the event, and Aestheticism Samurai ended up becoming, like, the standard way to play the deck. It was just a standard choice. So it's like, again, like, if you had just taken, a few hours out of your day, played 2 or 3 matches, heck, some of those people probably would have showed up with a better list than I did. Because, like I said, my list wasn't, like, super finely tuned. And I just noticed this, like, again and again and again throughout history, whether it's me or someone else. The great players, the Patrick Hobins of the world, they take time out of their day to evaluate all these different ideas. And, the scrubs who are, like, complaining all the time, they don't. Like, they'll just sit there and tell you, oh, this is bad in theory, I'm not going to try it. It's like, yeah, but what if it's not? Like, think about it this way. If there's, like, 5 matches every day that you're going to play, so you're going to play 5 dueling book matches every day, you have, say you have 2 choices, right? You have the deck that you think you want to play. Oh, I'm going to take this deck to the next event. And you can play, 5 matches, right? You can play 5 matches that day. And you can either play 5 matches with that deck that you think that you're going to play, that you're taking to the next event, or you can play 4 matches with that deck and 1 match with some other deck that you think, probably isn't good, but maybe it could be. Which is better? Well, clearly the second one. because, law of diminishing marginal returns begins to set in pretty quickly if you're just playing the same thing all the time. Like, I see so many players who just think that, like, oh, I'm just going to play this deck. I've got, like, all the best theoretical choices. I'm going to play 10 matches a day. And, because I'm playing so many matches a day, I'm going to be better than everyone else. And I'm going to, like, top the next event. And then they never do. And, like this guy here in the chat, they just end up blaming luck. Right? Like, they just think that, like, playing X number of matches a day, like, entitles them to get a good result. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Like, I'll honestly tell you, there are two things that people think matter to getting good results in Yu-Gi-Oh!, and neither of them matter. The first is talent, and the second is hard work. You don't need to do either of those to get a good result. Like, I am not, like, I do not have very much natural talent in the game. Right? And some people would even tell me that. Like, a lot of haters would be like, oh yeah, ACP, he has no talent. He makes mistakes all the time. Like, yeah. You got a point there. To an extent, you have a point. And again, same thing true with, like, Patrick Hobin. Very little natural talent. Tried to top and for years failed. So, like, lots of people like that. Very little natural talent. And hard work doesn't really matter either. Like, if you play, like, 10 hours a day on Dueling Book, I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. Like, it doesn't. Really, it's about working smarter, not harder. I know that's, like, kind of like a cliche. You hear people say that, like, at work, oh, work smarter, not harder. But in this case, it's true, because, like, 90% of the time that people are spending, doing practice and theory and all this stuff, 90% of that time is just wasted time. They're not learning anything, right? Because it's about, the knowledge pools. If you play a game and your knowledge hasn't increased at all, well, that doesn't count for anything. So yeah. And another cliche that people say that is kind of a bullshit cliche is you'll hear people say, oh, if something isn't broken, don't fix it, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that mentality is, like, partially what leads people to dismiss really good ideas, because they see something that already works to some extent, and then they think alternatives can't work. It's like the logic of saying, like, oh, gasoline-powered cars work fine, so we don't need electric cars, right? Because if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Now, obviously, like, kind of the issue with that philosophy is, what defines broke, right? Maybe gasoline powers are broken, right? They're broken in the sense that, there's only a limited amount of oil to drill for, and there's environmental concerns and so on. Okay, so maybe, you could make the case that gasoline-powered cars are broken. But, in the context of TCGs, a lot of people think, well, I'm playing what everyone else is playing, so it must be good, right? Like, oh, if everyone else is playing 2 Dust Tornadoes, there's no possible way that 3 could be good. And, like, perfect example of sort of that mentality was, like, when I created Angel Chaos in Go format in, like, I don't know, I think it was like 2017 or something. So it's like, when I came with that deck, again, one, I never get any of these ideas, like, entirely myself, right? Basically, all I did was say, hey, what if we took Chaos Recruiters, made it a little less aggro, cut the Mystic Tornadoes, and put in some Metamorphoses, right? I was just kind of like, hey, I think we can take Chaos Recruiters, sort of turn it a different direction, and it might be better, right? So, again, not an original idea, not a spontaneous idea, mostly just through observing others and realize, hey, I think I can improve upon this. But at the time I came up with this deck, it was unique in the sense that I was playing 3 Metamorphosis and no Tribute Monsters. And, like, everyone at the time when I was doing this is like, oh, this can't work. 3 metas, no tributes can't work. And it's like, well, why? Why can't it? Explain. And they go, well, you need to tribute, your 1,000 eyes in case you lock yourself, whatever. What if you just don't lock yourself? Then do you need tributes? And again, it's sort of the idea that they observed, anytime someone's playing through Metamorphosis, they're always playing 2 tribute monsters. So if 2 tributes works, then there's no way that 0 tributes could work. Right? It's like, if gasoline-powered cars work, then electric cars can't work. And it's like, no, not necessarily. Just because something works, something works doesn't mean that alternatives can't work. And, you have nothing to lose by trying something new. I once talked to a GOAT format player in Discord, right? And he posted his flip control deck. Okay? So he posted his flip control deck list, says, hey, here's my flip control deck. Give me your thoughts. And I was like, yeah, I got some thoughts. I always got some thoughts, right? I got some thoughts. And here's my thought. You should main deck Snatch Steal, because you're not main decking Snatch Steal, and it's a very good card. You're playing 3 Tsukiyomis, so if you Snatch Steal their guy, you can flip it down, flip it back up, Snatch Steal goes away, whatever, right? And he was like, nope, Snatch Steal's not good. And I said, okay, so how many matches have you played with flip control with Snatch Steal in your deck? And he said 0. And I said, oh, maybe you should try playing a few and let me know how it goes. And he said, no, I'm not doing that. And I was just like blown away. Like, again, won't even play 1 match. Not even 1 match, right? And that's like, that can be all the difference sometimes, right? If I just played that 1 match with Gravekeepers, I would have won a YCS. I mean, I could have won a YCS. Obviously, it's not guaranteed. You get the idea. So yeah, I mean, that's why, like, I'm always trying out, like, a lot of different things. And why, I think other people should try out things too. But that mentality, I see that so much. They just get this idea in their head, oh, this has to work, this can't work, and they won't consider any alternative, even if they're losing. I see some people, people play 100 matches of GOAT format, win like 50 of them, and are like, yeah, I'm not doing anything wrong. I've got it all figured out. It's like, no, you don't. If you had it all figured out, you'd be winning. I mean, again, the point isn't about Snatch Steal specifically, right? It's not about Snatch Steal. It's not about 3 Dust Tornadoes. It's not about Gravekeepers. It's not about Vanity's Emptiness. This isn't about individual cards. It's about the concept, right? And, what I do when I play matches is I try to take notes on, what works, what doesn't. And I do try new things, which is why, like, when you'll see me test a new list, there'll be, like, a lot of, like, weird one-ofs. Because I'm just trying to see if it works, right? Like with the GOAT control deck that I streamed a few weeks ago. Like, yeah, I'm gonna play 1 Solemn Judgment. We'll see how it goes, right? And that's just the best way to do things, and that's the way that the professionals do things, and they don't want you to know that. And good ideas can come from anywhere. In the case of the flip control Snatch Steal, I was a much better GOAT format player than this guy was, and he wouldn't even listen to me. So imagine if a worse GOAT format player came along and gave him a suggestion. Well, clearly he wouldn't take his suggestion, right? There could be other reasons too, right? It might have just been because he didn't like me, which is a real thing. I'll give you another example from my own personal experience. 2012. Windups. After the summer of 2012, I guess the new ban list came in, I don't know, September, October, whenever it was. So around that time, most of the top tier decks got hit by the ban list, and Windup Zen Master went from 3 down to 1. And that was kind of like the key card in the deck. So people were like, oh yeah, Windups are dead, not a real deck. And Windups actually went on to sort of become the not necessarily like the best deck in the format, but like the deck to beat, right? It went on to sort of become the standard deck that everyone was trying to beat, that, you know, was the most popular. And the first YCS of that format, after that wind-up ban, was won by someone perhaps some of you have heard of. And that man's name is Josh Graham. He won the first YCS with wind-ups. And if you all know anything about Josh Graham, you'll know that, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are, like, pretty scummy as a whole, but this guy, like, took it to a whole new level. I mean, this guy had, like, scammed people out of, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars of cards. But again, that's not the point of the story. The point is before that event that he won with windups, he was, you know, open about, yeah, windups, best deck, gonna go win this YCS. And to some extent, that was like boy who cried wolf, because he always said he had a broken deck that was gonna win the next YCS. But, you know, in this case, you know, he definitely did have a broken deck, and he did win the YCS, and windups did go on to become the best deck, and, you know, Grand Soil Psychics were absolute, you know, trash for the most part. And, you know, again, it's this point of the story isn't that Josh Graham didn't farm ideas, but that he was telling me before the event how good, you know, how good windups were, and I didn't want to hear any of it, right? Why didn't I want to hear any of it? Because who the fuck wants to play the same deck as Josh Graham, right? That guy's a scumbag. I'm not going to play the same deck as him. But just because you're a scumbag who scams people out of thousands of dollars of cards doesn't mean that you don't have good ideas, right? I mean, terrible people do have good ideas sometimes. And I mean, I know that kind of makes me sound like a fascist, you know? I'm not trying to say like, oh, Hitler had some good ideas. That's not where this is going. Don't worry. Let's not let this get off the rails too much here. The point of the story is that good ideas can be found everywhere. They can be found from bad players. They can be found from terrible people. They can be found from good players. And most of these ideas, like, you know, Patrick Hobin was all about, like, keeping things secret or whatever. But most of these ideas were, like, not secret ideas, right? Like, Josh Graham was going around willing to tell people how insane windups were. And most of us, myself included, were like, yeah, cool story, bro. You know, we just didn't really want to hear much of it. So that's just kind of like another example of this concept, where it's like, if I look back throughout my history, you know, most of the good decks, like, I knew about to some extent, right? Due to, you know, nothing that I did on my own. You know, nothing that I did. You just have to be receptive. There's actually a great quote by the CEO of Airbnb, and I can't remember his name. But, you know, this guy, you know, when we was talking about how, you know, how he's built such a great company. You know, Airbnb is more than a $100 billion company now. And he said, oh, it's not so much in life that you need to have ideas as much as you need to be a receiver of ideas. Right? And he's like, yeah, I'm nothing special. You know, I'm not some super genius. I just, you know, when I see a good idea, I give it a shot. And it's just the same thing with really any strategy game, right? Because business is really just a big strategy game. That's all it is. And, you know, much in the same way where, you know, sort of where skill is defined as the difference of a pool of knowledge, it's the same thing in business, right? You know, the best businesses know more than their competitors. It's the exact same thing. So yeah, I'll actually give you all another story. And that's Noel, the GOAT format player, and I guess also current format player for a time. And she was probably like one of the best players that I ever like interacted with, in the sense of like bouncing ideas off of each other, because she was very receptive to new ideas. Um, she came up with her own ideas and was very receptive to new ideas. And a good example of that is when she, said, "Hey, I think Thunder Dragon could be worth playing in Reasoning Gate." And there are various reasons why she thought it was a good idea. The main reason is because, Air Knight Parshath was a lot worse than people thought it was. And she recognized that and goes, "Well, I need another light, so Thunder Dragon could be a good replacement." And it also like sped up the deck a little. Like the average kill turn, instead of being like a turn 3 or a turn 4 deck, it became like a turn 2 deck. But again, the details aren't really important. This isn't about like the individual examples. It's about the fact that when she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna play Thunder Dragon Reasoning Gate," a lot of people were just like, "Oh, that can never work," right? There's no way that can ever work. And clearly, it did work, because she went and I believe got like a back-to-back like first place and a second place into like sort of major online GOAT tournaments, right? Major in the context of GOAT format, that is. But people, again, they weren't even willing to try one match, right? Like, if you just played a few matches with the deck, you'd have been like, yeah, she's on to something here. Thunder Dragon Reasoning Gate could work. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, like, none of this stuff is about theory, right? Like, you can't figure out if Air Knight is better than Thunder Dragon by just reading the two cards, right? And sort of theorizing everything. It's all you have to do is try it out. Like, oh yeah, Thunder Dragon can't work in a Reasoning Gate deck. Yeah, but what if it can, right? And again, it's sort of the idea of, oh, I've found something that works, therefore alternatives can't work, right? The idea that, oh, I have a Reasoning Gate that doesn't play Thunder Dragon, and that deck is good, therefore some sort of alternative way of building it can't possibly be good. And it's like, no, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. And speaking of hand traps, actually, I got another story for you, right? Last YCS I topped, YCS Atlanta, 2016. Played Monarchs, right? Domain Monarchs. I was one of 2 players who topped that event with Domain Monarchs. I had very little experience, right? I came back to the game after 3 years of not playing, like, at all. Tested very little. And yet I showed up with, what kind of went on to become, like, the standard Domain Monarch deck, right? Like, if you look at the Domain Monarch deck that went and won Nationals that same year, very similar to the list that I played. And one of the, the innovations that I added to the deck was I didn't play any hand traps. I played 0. And at the time, everyone was playing like somewhere between usually 4 and 8 hand traps in that deck. And I played 0. And sort of when I told people that, the reaction was kind of, oh, that can't possibly work, right? Oh, how are you going to win when you go second? And I was like, well, I tried it, and it does work. And I do win when I go second. So I'm going to play it. And, I'll remember, I had one, one testing partner, one main testing partner for that event. He played Domain Monarchs sort of with the standard 4 hand traps. And, at the event, he said, oh, I wish I had the balls that you have. I wish that I had the balls to just not play any hand traps. And I told him, I wish that I had the balls to play hand traps. In other words, from my experience, not playing any hand traps was sort of the less risky choice. Hence I thought he was taking a bigger risk by playing hand traps. I thought that was the more ballsy move. But, again, everyone was playing hand traps. So you show people something that is an alternative to that, and they're like, no, that can't possibly work. Here are the reasons why. And it's like, yeah, but what if it does, right? I mean, the only way that you're going to be, a world-class player is by knowing something that other people don't. And the only way to obtain that pool of knowledge is to try new things. That's all it comes down to. And, people won't like that. A lot of people won't like that, especially in the Yu-Gi-Oh community. They don't want anyone to upset the apple cart, so to speak. And, I noticed that, throughout my career, right? If we sort of take the time that I sort of competitively played the game, from 2006 to 2013, and then again in 2016, if we sort of take that period of time and like cut it in half, for the first half of that time, again, from my experience, from the first half of that time, I got sort of the classic, like, backhanded compliment of, oh, ACP, you're like the best player who's never topped a YCS. And I mean, it's pretty genuine compliment, right? Like, yeah, you're really good. How haven't you topped yet? And that was after I was topping YCSs. I kind of got the opposite reaction of, oh, ACP, that guy's a hack. He doesn't know anything. Don't listen to him. And it's just kind of weird how that works. Like, when you're not winning, people root for you to win, and then when you are winning, people root for you to lose. And I think that's just kind of like true in general. But in my case, it was because I was winning, in a way that people largely didn't want me to win. And classic example of that, a lot of people heard of the story, Gishki FDK, right? That is like the ultimate example of winning in a way that people didn't want me to win. And again, common factor in all these stories, my stories at least, common factor in all of them, didn't come up with the idea, right? I was just willing to, I was just willing to be a receiver of ideas, right? Unlike Gravekeepers, where I said, Gravekeepers, that's interesting, and moved on with my life. Unlike Windups, where, I said, oh, Josh Graham sucks, I'm not going to play that deck. Unlike those two circumstances, someone showed me Gishki, and again, I actually got the idea from a public online forum post, right? Anyone could read. And I was like, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this is a real deck. And then, of course, I, got good results with the deck, kind of did turn it into a real deck. And the reaction that people had was trying to explain to everyone why it wasn't good. Again, these are people who have played like 0 matches with the deck, 0 matches against the deck, and yet they know it's not good. Like, that's basically like me telling you that your girlfriend is ugly and you haven't even shown me a picture of her yet, right? That just doesn't make any sense, right? It's like, how can you judge something when you have 0 experience interacting with the thing that you're judging? And yet everyone did, because they didn't want the deck to be good, right? And yeah, so you had a lot of people spending all their time trying to convince everyone that the deck was bad. And what I, told people, somewhat, sarcastically, but mostly truthfully, I said, if you took all of the time, some of these players that were going around telling everyone, oh, don't worship the false god of Gishki, told those players, if you had just taken all the time that you put into trying to convince people that the deck was bad, you took that hours of time and you just played a few matches with the deck, you'd have realized you were wrong, right? But they didn't want to do that. So, again, whenever there's new ideas, whenever there's a new idea, guys, people are going to tell you your idea sucks. And you know why that is? Well, I mean, it's easy, right? If people thought your idea was good, then they would already be doing it themselves, and hence it wouldn't be a new idea, right? I mean, all new ideas are bad by definition, right? Again, think about the electric car, right? When Tesla is getting started doing all the electric car stuff, Ford, General Motors, all those companies, oh yeah, this is a terrible idea. Well, clearly they think it's a terrible idea, or they would have been doing it, right? That's just common sense. So every new idea is always a bad idea. And some of them actually are bad ideas. Like I said, kind of, again, reference back the sort of the story that I gave about Patrick Hobin and Super Rejuvenation, where he had this idea, hey, maybe I shouldn't play Super Rejuvenation in Dragon Rulers. Turned out it wasn't a good idea. But it's a win-win either way, right? Obviously, the bigger win is when you stumble upon an idea that's really good, and then you go crush a tournament with it, the way that, like, I did with Gishki. But a small win is even just understanding why things work and why things don't work, right? Just kind of the same way, people like to take things apart, where they just say, oh, I want to, take apart a motorcycle and put it back together, right? Well, why are they doing that? It's because they want to fundamentally understand how that works. Another quote from a businessman, Eric Ries. He wrote the book The Lean Startup. Very good book, by the way, which you guys should all read. Is, he said that the way that you win is by learning faster than everyone else. And of course, he was giving that quote in the context of business, but it applies to a lot of other things. And the beautiful thing about failing over and over again, coming up with these new ideas, then realizing, oh, this idea sucks, this idea sucks, this idea sucks, is the more you do this, the more you'll have a better idea of, whether you basically get to fail faster. You figure out more quickly what works and what doesn't because you have all of the experience of your previous failures. Yeah, I mean, it's not even really about, like, theory versus practice. I mean, I sort of rag on people a lot who, like, try to use theory to, like, justify all of these decisions or whatever. But it's kind of like a related concept, but it's not really, like, the same thing. Really, it's more of the fact that you can't have theory without practice. Right? It would be like, like, to use an example, right? We have, like, the theory of gravity, right? Newton sort of figured out, like, how, objects fall in, a very specific way, right? They accelerate at a constant rate, and, the velocity increases the longer that they're falling, and so on and so forth. And he developed this theory, right? He developed a set of mathematical equations to explain how that rock actually falls when you drop it off a cliff. But how did he get that, right? How did he get those equations? How did he come up with that theory? Well, it was by observing the same thing happening over and over again. Right? I mean, I hate to say it, this is going to sound ableist, but, like, a blind person never could have come up with the theory of gravity. I'm sorry, I know I'm going to offend all the blind people that are watching this video, but a blind person couldn't have come up with the theory of gravity, because you have to actually observe it to come up with a theory to explain it. And the way that you come up with new theories is by trying new ideas. Right? That's where theories come from. Clearly, Isaac Newton was trying some shit that other people weren't trying.